Now today we will study about genome, and this topic I have chosen from the molecular genetics. Now what genome means? Genome simply means the sum total of the genetic material. It's a simply genome simply means the sum total of all the genetic material which is present in an organism, and that genetic material contains the biological information of that organism. So simply genome means sum total of all the genetic material present in an organism. Sum total of all the genetic material which is present in an organism is known as it is genome. And this genetic material contains the biological information. Okay. Now, based upon the nature of genome may be either DNA or it may be either RNA. Okay, so on the basis of the nature of genome may be in the form of DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, or in the form of RNA. Okay, now if we talk about the eukaryotes and prokaryotes, eukaryotes and prokaryotes have DNA as their genome. Okay, most of the eukaryotes and prokaryotes simply can write here the genome in the eukaryotes and prokaryotes is of the DNA nature. Okay, but some viruses are there in which the genetic material is either DNA or RNA. Viruses, they may have genetic material of the nature of DNA or of the nature of RNA. DNA or RNA as genetic material. Okay, now talking about the eukaryotic genome, if we talk about the eukaryotic genome here, now eukaryotic genome, it has two distinct parts. Eukaryotic genome, if we talk about the eukaryotic genome has two distinct parts. Now what these two distinct parts are? One is nuclear genome, and another is organelle genome. And you know that organelle genome is that genome, that DNA, that genetic material which is present in organelles, and those organelles are mitochondria and chloroplast. Mitochondria and chloroplast are the organelles which have their own genetic material, which have their own genome. That is why they are known as semi-autonomous organelles, mitochondria and chloroplast. Okay, so eukaryotic genome, it is eukaryotic genome is having the two distinct parts. One is called as the nuclear genome. It is that genome, it is that amount of the genetic material which is found inside the nucleus. And organelle genome, it is that amount of genetic material which is found in the organelles, like as mitochondria and chloroplast. Okay, now the nuclear genome consists of linear double-stranded DNA. Nuclear genome, it consists of the linear double-stranded DNA. eukaryotes, linear double stranded DNA. Now nuclear genome, it consists of the linear double stranded DNA, but in few eukaryotes this double stranded but in few eukaryotes there is a circular. Most of the eukaryotes are having the linear double stranded DNA, but some in the lower eukaryotes, or some in few eukaryotes or lower eukaryotes, mostly in the lower eukaryotes there is a single circular plasmid DNA. Okay, this is the case linear double stranded DNA. This is the case of most eukaryotes. It is most eukaryotes. But lower eukaryotes, but if we talk of the lower eukaryotes, are having the DNA, but the DNA is circular, double stranded circular plasmid DNA. They are having the double stranded, circular plasmid DNA. Okay, you have to remember this point, that lower eukaryotes, they are having a circular plasmid DNA, while as most of the eukaryotes or higher eukaryotes, they are having the linear double stranded DNA. Okay. And if we take the example of the lower eukaryotes who are having the double stranded circular plasmid DNA, one of the example is of the yeast. Yeast is having the 2 micron circle in the yeast. There is a 2 micron plasmid DNA in the yeast. Okay. Now moving forward. Now the amount of DNA which is present in the genome of a species. Okay. Here's a term known as the C value. Here's the term which is called as C value. Now what C value means? C value simply means the amount of DNA which is present in the genome of a species. Okay, it simply means the amount of DNA present in the genome of a species. Genome of okay, and the characteristic, it is one of the characteristic feature of a species. This C value is one of the characteristic feature of a species. Okay, simply you have to firstly understand what C value means. C value simply means the amount of the DNA which is present in the genome of a species. Now this C value, it becomes a characteristic feature. It becomes a characteristic feature of a particular type of a species. Not a particular, it simply becomes a characteristic feature of any species. So C value, it is a characteristic feature, of each species. Now the C value, the value of C, if we look about the value of C, now the C value, it has the highest, and I will just tell you about here the lower and the highest value of the C value. If we talk about the C value, in lower eukaryotes, or firstly we will take up the smallest C value, the value of the the value of simply the measurement of the C value in prokaryotes like the mycoplasms. mycoplasmas. Mycoplasmas are having a C value which is less than 10 raised power 6 base pairs. Okay, so it is the smallest value. It is one of the smallest C value. So smallest C value is found in the mycoplasmas, and they are having the C value of 10 raised power 6 base pairs. Okay. Now the highest C value is of amphibians. Amphibians are eukaryotes. They are having the highest C value, and their C value is greater than 10 raised power 11 base pairs. And most of the cells of the amphibians, they contain 30 times more DNA than the human cells. Okay, and now this was the highest and the lowest C value which have been calculated in the prokaryotes and eukaryotes. If we take about the example of the different phylums in the lower organisms or in the lower eukaryotes, there occurs a correlation between the C value and the complexity of an organism. C value and organisms complexity. There is a correlation in lower eukaryotes. There is a correlation between C value and organisms complexity. But it is the case of lower eukaryotes. In lower eukaryotes, there is a correlation between the C value and the organism's complexity. If organism's complexity increases, it is C value increase. The correlation is increase in complexity increases C value. Okay, increase in complexity increases C value. But this case is only applicable to lower eukaryotes. Therefore, in the lower eukaryotes, if the complexity of organism gets increased, the amount of DNA also gets increased. Okay, good. But in higher eukaryotes, this correlation doesn't exist. This was in lower eukaryotes. I will write here lower eukaryotes. But in higher eukaryotes, there occurs no correlation between the C value and the organism's complexity. Okay, that's why if we plot a graph of size of the eukaryotic genome and the C value, the graph becomes paradox, because firstly in the lower eukaryotes it gets increased with the complexity of an organism, then up to the amphibians it firstly gets increased up to the amphibians. As the complexity increases, the C value gets increased from 10 raised power 4, which is found in the algae, and 10 raised power not 4, it is 10 raised power 6 starting from the lower eukaryotes. Then it becomes 10 raised power 7, 10 raised power 8 in the worms, 10 raised power 9 in chynoderms, 10 raised power 9.2 in the fishes. And then amphibians, this complexity when increases to a maximum value, this complexity of organisms when gets increased up to the amphibian state, the C value at the amphibian state reaches 10 raised power 11. Then from the 10 raised power 11, when When amphibians, there is birds, there are mammals, and there are flowering plants. That means complexity is increasing. Complexity is increasing, but the DNA content is not increasing. DNA content is not increasing, it is decreasing. That means in the lower eukaryotes there is increase in the complexity, increase in the C value, but in the higher eukaryotes, like the amphibians up to the mammals or up to the flowers, complexity increases but C value decreases. C value decrease. Okay, so this topic was about the genome, and in the next topic we will study about the gene complexity. In another topic we will study about the gene complexity. Now at last in this topic we will just pay a look towards the organisms and their genome size. Some of the organisms are, I will just put the value of I will put the value of some organisms here whose genome size I will mention here. Ascariaceae, it is genome size. It is size. Size is 12 MB. 12 MBs. There is a size. Organism and size. And I will just take up the humans. Humans are having a genome size of 5,000, not 5,000, it is 3,300 MB. And of the barley, that means Walagri, the genome size is of 5,300 MBs. Okay, so it's a size of some of the organisms, size of the genome of some organisms. If we take up if we take up the fruit fly, that means Drosophila melanogaster. Fruit fly, fruit fly, Drosophila melanogaster. Its genome size is 120 MBs. Okay, so today's topic was about the genome, and we have studied what genome means, what is the nature of the genome. We have studied it, and we have studied also about the C value. Okay, so that is all in the today's lecture. We will study in the next lectures about the gene complexity, about the repetitive sequences, about the highly repetitive DNA sequences. So from today onwards we will study almost all the molecular genetics.